it's Debra Atkinson. I'm going to give you 3 exercise fixes, 3 common exercises that are being recommended significantly, and they are a huge point of mystery and I think of confusion. We're going to start with squats. We're going to go to deadlifts, which I'm seeing a lot of people recommending deadlifts in their program right now for lower body exercise, for glute work. And there's a lot of mistakes that can happen. And the third exercise we're going to talk about is shoulders. Everybody wants great arms to go sleeveless, focusing on shoulders, and yet there's so much that could go wrong. So I don't want to scare you. However, I want to empower you to make great choices about what you're doing and potentially confirm what you already suspect may not feel good and may be putting you at risk for injury. So we can eradicate that and get you all the benefits. Here's what you're going to see. Number 1, squats. I'm just at home demonstrating deadlifts and shoulder presses. After the exercises, after I talk you through them, I'll come back, give you a conclusion about what you could do instead if they're not working for you. Let's go. As I do this squat, I want you to pay most attention to my toe, my heel, and my knee and the relationship between them. And then I'll ask you to look a little bit more at my hip and you'll see this entire relationship. So where we get a little crazy, people get a little bit upset with where should my knees be? Do they need to be over my toe? Can they go in front of my toe? And where is the best place? It really depends a little bit, but when we're doing a squat, I'm gonna not look, I wanna look up. So I'm gonna go here, and I can tell you that right now I'm still in good form. And right now, I'm still in good form. Here's what's gonna feel like I'm not in the right place. This doesn't feel good, and here's why. So the squat is a quad dominant exercise. It means there's a lot of quadricep use, the front of the thigh. Where we fail to have as much strength later in life is in our glutes. We sit on them a lot, we don't use them quite as much. They're responsible for extension. So extension at that hip. Whether you're in a golf swing, you're getting up and out of the chair, or you're climbing mountains or hills, these are important. If you're on a bicycle and you're going uphill, the stronger your glutes, the better it is, and the more you save your knees if you have good form. So let's talk about good form. So the difference between what is good form is not always available to see through the eye, and here's why. The length of your knee to your heel, and the length from your knee to your hip, and even the length from your hip to the crown of your head, this long lever, your torso length, all of these factors, but most importantly, this length and this length determine what's good form. So you can't just look, I can't just look and say, oh, this is good form or this is bad form. Right now, I still feel my weight on my heels. However, if I freeze framed right here and dropped a plumb line down, my knee is a little beyond my toe, isn't it? And you might look at that and say, well, that's not good. It's okay. As long as my weight is here in my bum, I feel the weight of my heels, I know I'm here. As soon as I feel the weight go to the balls of my feet, just see that shift, right? When I'm here, now my weight is here, and I have to decelerate with the quadriceps, the stress goes to my knees. So visually, it's a little hard to see. This is good. This is still good. This is still good. But if I go any further forward, now I'm on the balls of my feet. My heels have lightened up. Can you see? Sometimes visually you can, other times not so much. But this is a really important distinction to make. So when we do squats, if you might say, this doesn't feel good to me, what I'd like you to do is to play a little bit. So come down and into it, maybe part way. See if you can shift backward, as if there's a chair back here. You're going to tap your bum in it and then come up and just tap your bum in it. See if you can wiggle your toes. No, we don't want you to do that if you have a heavy weight and you're holding on to it. We just want you to feel that weight shift back to your heels. I want you to think about if you've always patterned it one way, you've always done it one way, your brain sending signals to the muscle will be sending them in a way that maybe you keep repeating that mistake. Over time, as you correct yourself, it will get better. A mirror can help, but more importantly, it's for you. How does it feel? Because it may not look like anyone else's. If you're watching a trainer like me, who is 5'4.5", with different set of lever legs from here to here and here to here, and you're 5'8", or you're 5'4", but your lever from your ankle to your knee and your knee to your hip are different than mine, we won't look exactly the same, but they still could be right and good form. Super important distinction. So the key is weight on the heels primarily. The big toes and the ball of your feet are down for balance. The big toe is really important in balance. And if you can't go all the way down, you find pain-free range of motion. So we have an angle from the hip, but the chest is up, the eyes are up ideally, and not down. And then you've got great form. And you're working a little bit more on your glutes. The quads are still heavily involved, and the hamstrings work in synergy as helping to put the brakes on. But the things that are in extension, pushing the hip up, are both the hamstrings and the glutes, and that's really what we're focusing on here. The quadriceps are extension at the knee, and they also are helpful. So important pieces here. The key is weight on the heels. In deadlifts, here's what generally people are trying to do. We want a better butt, we want a stronger butt, we want stronger glutes. And in some small part, some people are doing now with a focus on wanting to strengthen the hamstrings, which is very important. What we don't want, so we want to think, yes, what we do, we want these benefits. We don't want to risk the lower back or a high hamstring pull, which can also happen because our glutes are weak. The hamstrings may take over and do too much. Those are things to watch out for, but I want you to watch form. So I'm going to come down, I'm going to pick up these two weights. Now you can have a bar you're holding, or you can have dumbbells, but we always want to start straight up. Pay attention to the glutes and the full extension that I'm in now. Now before I go, I'm going to shift the weight back into my heels. So you want to have that push back. Now my weight's in my heels, the balls of my feet and toes are still down, and I'm going to come down and lower this down, but I'm going to keep my focus forward and then come back up into full extension. Here's the mistake. What I see a lot of people doing is coming all the way down. Can you see how my lower back has melted and rounded? And now I'm coming up. So when I get beyond a point where I can keep a slight arch in my back, it's still here now because I can feel it. But when I get to here, I'm rounding my back and I'm just maybe thinking of the target on the floor, but that's not your target. You want to remember that the target you have is here. Am I feeling it in the right place? So it's press the hip back, lower down to about 45 degrees. It's really all you need. The lower you go, the more stress and strain on the lower back, the more risk to the discs in the lower back, and often the more risk of injury to the high hamstrings as well if these weights go too heavy. So make sure that you're able to feel the weight, and you can come down and then come up. Watch a little bit of power. So this is a little bit of speed, boom. So it's very slow on the down or eccentric contraction, a little bit of push coming through, and the cheeks are squeezing together. So lower down, and then exhale and push. Keep the big toe down, ball of your foot down, but not weight bearing. Now, here's one more way of doing this, and I will either hold a single weight or I'll hold a single bigger weight. So I just went from here to about 10 pounds. Good point to start. This one is about 30, okay? I'm gonna be on one leg, and that is the left, while I hold with the right. Opposites are important because that's how we walk, it's how we're patterned. But if I want to strengthen specifically this cheek, the glute here, and the connection, which is why we need and where we need power, I'm going to go a very short distance, about 30 degrees, and I'm going to come up. This is absolutely not a come here and come here, because then we lose it in the glute. We don't get more results, we get worse. And we want to focus very much on just push through the glute. So it's explosive. explosive. And notice that back toe. So I really want to leave that up if possible. Keep my focal point. And I'm using this if I need to spot. Opposite side, same thing. So what you want to be aware of is if you go for great range of motion, you're going to torque the hip. If you're just going to one leg, your goal is I'm just coming down and I'm just coming up. 30-degree range of motion and then push. That gets the glute, gets the hamstring insertion into the glute. Those are the two weakest points. Here's what's strong and imbalanced. It's not necessarily strong, but it's tight because we spend so much time sitting. We're in this degree of flexion, and these muscles often are pulling forward as we walk. And if you're a runner, even more so. If you're a casual runner and you're doing a lot of running or running uphill, your hamstrings may be doing all the work pulling as opposed to your quadriceps doing all the pulling as opposed to your hamstrings pushing off the ground. We want push, push here, push, power up. So we're strengthening that connection, and then a little foam rolling, a little melt method with Sue Hitzman to release these tight hip flexors. Your form will get so much better. You want to think about, why am I doing my deadlift? What's the recommendation? Can I do that? But if you're doing big and heavy weight from here and you're coming all the way up, there's a good chance that you're out of your heels, you're into your lower back, and unless you're using, say, a squat rack like a hex squat, so you can't do it poorly. If you're using a bar, you really want to be careful. Pick it up one time. After that, go with short range of motion and really focus on getting good form. And that will help you avoid injury to that high hamstring. It's like a pencil with an eraser on the top of it, happens in this insertion. If you've ever felt that, it's like sitting on a thorn, and you will feel it for months, but it takes a long time to get rid of it. You don't want to overstress and overstrain that. So really think about, what's my goal? Do I need better form? Do I need that connection first to be strong before potentially you might think I can go on and do deadlifts with heavier weight? Then you want to think, is the risk to my lower back worth it? I hope that was helpful, helping you decide, is a deadlift appropriate? And if so, what kind and what range of motion is appropriate? Everybody wants sexy shoulders. The question is, how do you get them without stressing your shoulders? The shoulders have so many motions that they do. They do abduction, they do adduction, they do forward flexion and extension. We can go up and overhead, and they rotate internally and externally. And that means there's a lot that can go wrong with this amazing joint. Here's typically what happens. So when you come up and you do a chest press, or I'm sorry, a shoulder press machine, often the handles are out here and you're pushing up and overhead, right? So when you do dumbbell presses, often they're demonstrated also like this. Let me tell you what can go wrong. So I'm going to turn to the side in a standing position doing this. If I don't have my knees bent slightly and conscious awareness of my core, the temptation is really strong when we go overhead and we have to be in charge of all of these levers to your knee, to your hip, to your lower back. We tend to arch the back when we come up and over. If you have really great control, motor control, good sense of body awareness, perception in space of where you are, you may be able to do this one without any challenges and also get good core work because you're engaged. For the rest of us, it gets a little challenging and tricky. But the thing that's always going on in my mind is thinking about your shoulder muscle and how this is skeletally put together. We have this over the top right here, and then we have a ball and socket joint. When you raise up, we almost run into each other. There's a risk of impingement. If we move these weights to the front and we're lifting like this, it gets far more comfortable. So if you're trying this, do it with a really light weight so you don't risk any injury. But coming up like that, try that. And now come up, take your elbows in front of your shoulders and try it this way. the range of motion feels so much more free. You don't have that running into something, that difficulty. And you know, getting challenged in exercise is not a bad thing, but getting challenged because you're not actually challenging the muscle. That's the wrong thing. So here's what I prefer to see people do, and that is this. Do one at a time. Even better. Now I have better motor control down here because not both of them are coming up where I'm going to be more tempted to do this. And definitely I'm exaggerating. You may have the ability to keep your strength and do that without arching, but many of us don't, and we get tired. This is a small muscle group where usually it's better left toward the end of your workouts. And if that's true, you're already a little tired through the core. So going with one arm is so much more beneficial. Now here's the other change. I like to see this done seated if you're new to it, because we can eliminate having to think about from the hip down by doing that. Just have to think about one piece really and maintaining that core. Better start. Here's an advanced and yet also a better start. Wow, and this is a bumpy mat, so I'm going to fold that just a little bit. So on my knee, the knee I have down. Now, I've got a longer lever than if I were sitting. I'm going to do this with one arm, and the other arm I can either choose to put a weight in, or I can put that weight down. So I'm going to go right here, and then I'm going to raise up and overhead. So do it with no weight with me first. We'll do 3 right here, and then come down and up, come down and up. So fairly easy. You don't have that weight, and when you do have the weight, you're going to be much more tempted to come back. You'll feel your core. Now, if you're on your dominant side, it will be easier as you learn, but on your non-dominant side, your likelihood of arching is going to be far greater. So I'm right dominant. My left obliques are weaker, and probably, not definitely, but probably you're in the same situation. Or if you're left dominant, you actually have an advantage. Your right and left sides are a little bit more imbalanced. So watch this. So now I come up and I'm lifting and coming up and down. Elbow stays right in front of me. I don't let that drift to the side. It's right here, and I also don't let it drift over here where I'm going to strain the shoulder. It's directly up and overhead or even slightly inside, and it becomes a little bit more core. So I'm going to switch sides, coming over. You won't see the challenge, but already my core is lit up. I'm aware of it because it's weaker, and that means I just have to focus a little bit more in order to keep good form and to keep this rib and hip connection. What I mean by that is not allowing it to open up and close. It's the same right there. So I want you to pick up a weight. When you're ready, coming into a kneeling position makes this much more functional, but it's also so much better, and it's almost like a piece of core exercise tucked into your upper body training. So it gets safer, it gets more focused on the muscles you actually want to work, and incorporates a little bit of core too. If for some reason you can't kneel, you could potentially do this one in a standing lunge and get a bit more flavor for doing it with a staggered stance, less pressure on the lower back, and a little bit more work through the core. So now my hope is that you can see it's not just about starting any program or doing a list of exercises that say this exercise targets the glutes, this exercise targets the shoulder. You really want to choose wisely based on what are my goals, and if any limitations exist, prior injuries, maybe you don't have a strong core. That means probably you should not be standing and lifting things overhead because there's so much to think about. Should you do it, but maybe you can do it seated, not standing, because it's going to make it a little bit easier to control fewer details, fewer joints that you have to think about. So if you can't do squats, what can you do? You could do a hamstring curl. You could, if you're at home, lie down on the floor, do a bridge up with the hips, hamstring curl with the hips, one or the other of those. Great substitutes. If you can't get down on the floor, sidestepping with bands can be a good way to target the glutes, which is normally what we want to do. With deadlifts, similar, those substitutions are also very appropriate. You can do hip thrusts, which are like a hip bridge, but adding a little bit more weight to the work. So you might have a dumbbell or a weight plate on the front of your hips. So body weight first, then progress. Are we in agreement? Last but not least, if you can't do overhead shoulder work, just don't, right? So you may in fact have been told by someone after a rotator cuff injury, maybe you worked with a physical therapist, don't do overhead shoulder work. You know, and when you take your plates at Thanksgiving and you put them up on the top shelf, that's overhead shoulder work. If you travel and you've got a carry-on and you put it up in the bin overhead, you have to think about that too. Do I want to continue to do that? Definitely don't do that if you've eliminated overhead shoulder work for yourself. But if you need to do shoulder work without overhead, you absolutely can. You can do lateral raises, front raises, rear deltoid raises, or we call them reverse flies. There are plenty of ways to work the shoulder without going up and overhead. We've done it with lots of our clients for over 40 years. There are a lot of people who have that restriction, and or if you're a female, you tend to carry your tension here in the upper back. These muscles tend to overfire. They're called your upper traps or trapezius muscles. That's another problem we want to take care of, but in a different video. But if you tend to hike those up, you tend to have lots of strain and stress, maybe even headaches. Here, you may want to watch what you're doing with that overhead work. It may, if you can do them with good form, support you in being able to depress those shoulders, have better form, and therefore not end up getting stressed here, and may mean fewer headaches. But you need to know who you are. Think about where's your starting position now. I hope that was helpful. Don't forget, click subscribe, click the bell. That'll let you know and get a notification when I drop a new video. And if you have an exercise that you'd love to know, this one doesn't feel good for me, I'm wondering if I'm doing it wrong or if you could give good pointers. Hope that was helpful, and I'll see you on the flip side.